Imagine standing at the epicenter of the greatest man-made disaster in human history. Now imagine surviving it, traveling 300 miles to find safety, only to have it happen all over again 3 days later. This is not a work of dark fiction. This is the true story of Tsutomu Yamaguchi, the man who was hit by 2 atomic bombs and lived to tell the world why they must never be used again.
To understand the magnitude of Yamaguchi's life, we have to go back to a time before the world knew the power of the atom. Born in 1916 in Nagasaki, Tsutomu was a man of logic and industry. He was a naval engineer for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. In the early 1940s, Japan was a nation consumed by the fervor of World War II. But Yamaguchi was not a soldier on the front lines. He was a designer, a creator of tankers and transport ships.
He spent his days hunched over blueprints, calculating displacements and structural integrity. He was a family man, devoted to his wife, Hisako, and their young son. By the summer of 1945, the tide of the war had turned violently against Japan. Fuel was scarce, food was rationed, and the sky was often filled with the roar of American B-29 bombers.
But for Yamaguchi, life was defined by a 3-month business trip to Hiroshima. He had been sent there to design a new class of oil tankers. On August 6, 1945, his assignment was finally over. He was 29 years old, exhausted, and eager to get home to Nagasaki.
That Monday morning was clear and bright. Yamaguchi and 2 colleagues were walking to the Mitsubishi shipyard one last time to complete some paperwork. As they walked toward the docks, Yamaguchi realized he had forgotten his hanko, a personal seal used for official documents. He turned back toward his boarding house to retrieve it. It was a mundane mistake, a moment of forgetfulness that would save his life and haunt him for the next 65 years.
At 8:15 a.m., as he walked back toward the shipyard, Yamaguchi heard the drone of a lone aircraft. He looked up and saw a silver speck in the sky, trailing a small parachute. He thought it was a reconnaissance plane or perhaps a propaganda drop. Then the world turned white. He later described it not as an explosion, but as a pita, a flash of light so blinding it stripped the color from the universe. He had time to dive into a ditch before the dawn, the thunderous boom, shattered the air.
The shockwave picked him up and spun him through the air like a leaf in a hurricane. When he hit the ground and opened his eyes, the morning sun was gone. The sky was a bruised, dusty gray. He was roughly 2 miles from ground zero. His face and arms were badly burned, his left eardrum was ruptured, and he was temporarily blinded. When his vision cleared, he looked around at a landscape that no longer made sense. The buildings were gone. The shipyard was a skeleton of twisted steel. Yamaguchi managed to find his 2 colleagues, who had also survived with varying degrees of injury. They spent a night of pure horror in an air raid shelter, surrounded by people whose skin was melting off their bones, people screaming for water that would only make them sicken and die. The city of Hiroshima had effectively ceased to exist. The next morning, driven by a primal urge to reach his family, Yamaguchi crawled toward the railway station. The journey was a descent into the inferno. He had to cross a river choked with the bodies of those who had jumped into the water to escape the heat, only to drown or boil. Somehow, amidst the total collapse of the city's infrastructure, a train was still running. It was packed with the burned and the dying. Yamaguchi boarded that train, clutching his scorched arms, and headed west. He was going home. He was going to Nagasaki.
He arrived in Nagasaki on August 8th. When he reached his house, his wife Hisako barely recognized him. He was covered in bandages, his skin was blackened, and he was shaking with a fever that wouldn't break. Any rational person would have stayed in bed, but Yamaguchi was a man of duty. Despite his agony, he reported to the Mitsubishi office in Nagasaki the very next morning, August 9th, to brief his supervisor on the destruction he had witnessed.
At 11 a.m., Yamaguchi sat in an office on a hill, describing the single flash that had leveled Hiroshima. His boss stared at him with utter disbelief. He told Yamaguchi he was a dead man walking, that his story was impossible.
How could one bomb destroy a whole city? His supervisor asked. You're an engineer. Use your head.
At that exact moment, the window of the office turned white. The same pica he had seen 3 days earlier filled the room. The Americans had just dropped Fat Man on Nagasaki.
The heat was instantaneous. The shockwave blew out the reinforced windows, and Yamaguchi hit the floor once again. He would later say, with a grim sense of irony, "I thought the mushroom cloud had followed me from Hiroshima."
Because the geography of Nagasaki was hilly, and Yamaguchi was in a reinforced building on the other side of a ridge from the blast, he was shielded from the worst of the second explosion. He survived again. But his bandages were blown off, and his existing burns were aggravated. He rushed home through the ruins, fearing the worst for his family. He found his house in shambles, but his wife and son had been out looking for medicine for his burns and were in a tunnel when the bomb hit. They were alive. In the days following the second blast, the true horror of the atomic age began to manifest. Yamaguchi's hair fell out in clumps. His burns became infected. He vomited incessantly. He was suffering from acute radiation poisoning, a mystery illness the Japanese doctors were struggling to understand. For weeks, he lay on a mat, hovering between life and death, while Japan surrendered and the occupation began.
But Tsutomu Yamaguchi was a man made of something different. He didn't die. He slowly, painfully recovered. As the years passed, he rebuilt his life. He worked as a translator for the U.S. Marines during the occupation, then returned to his career as an engineer at Mitsubishi. He and Hisako had 2 more children, daughters. For decades, he lived a quiet, unassuming life. He rarely spoke about the war. He didn't want to be known as a victim. He simply wanted to be a father, a husband, and an engineer.
However, the shadow of the bombs never truly left him. He suffered from chronic health issues, and his children were plagued by ailments that he feared were the result of his radiation exposure. He watched as the world entered the Cold War, as nations built thousands of weapons even more powerful than the ones that had shattered his life. In his 80s, something shifted. Yamaguchi realized that he was one of the last living links to a history the world was beginning to forget. He felt a profound responsibility. He decided that his survival wasn't just luck, it was a mandate. He began to speak out. He wrote a memoir. He traveled to the United Nations in New York to advocate for the total abolition of nuclear weapons. He spoke to students, telling them that the only path to a future was a path without the pica. He famously said, "The reason that I hate the atomic bomb is because of what it does to the dignity of human beings."
In 2006, he was featured in a documentary about the Niju Hibakusha, the twice bombed. While many people were known to have been in both cities, Yamaguchi became the only person officially recognized by the Japanese government as a survivor of both blasts. He didn't want the title for fame. He wanted it so that the record would show the undeniable truth of what had happened.
Even in his final years, his mind remained sharp. When filmmaker James Cameron visited him in the hospital to discuss a potential film about the bombings, it was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, but also a warning of its capacity for destruction.
Tsutomu Yamaguchi passed away in 2010 at the age of 93. He had lived through the end of the samurai era's influence, the rise of imperialism, the absolute nadir of the atomic bombings, and the miraculous rebirth of Japan as a global power. He was a man who saw the end of the world twice and decided to spend the rest of his life making sure no one else ever had to see it once. His legacy isn't just about the statistical impossibility of his survival. It's about the choice he made after the smoke cleared. He chose peace over bitterness. He chose memory over silence. If you believe stories like this need to be remembered, subscribe